Oh, it's the minor navies in 1942. And if major nations have issues with options constricting as war goes on, them losing and losing the option to change what they're doing, having less and less resources to spare to spend on different things, and having their options just disappear, minor nations have it worse than anyone else. They have no options. This is going to be probably the quickest of all the videos because there is weaknesses and there's what they can do. And why there and how to fix? Well, there aren't many real options for how they can fix them. This is one of the reasons why, when I was doing this, looking at this analysis and looking at this question, I was going, that's actually quite hard to do. Because in January 1st, 1939, there's a lot you can talk about. Because war hasn't started yet, so you can do amazing things. And there's all these debates going on. January 1940, again, you have some options, especially for two of the big powers. January 1941, you still have some of those options there. They're dividing down, but you still have options. January 1942, everyone is at war. Everyone is at war. There are no options. For the Royal Navy, for the Australian and New Zealand navies. Now, previously when I did a picture of Commonwealth navies, there was, of course, HMZS Achilles, or HMS Achilles at one point, soon to be of the New Zealand squadron, soon to be HMZS. So, this time I've done HMS Sydney. I've done the Australians. What's their options? Well, they haven't been building the infrastructure and industry they need, and they haven't been using that to grow and recruit the right population. And by right, I mean the technical population they could have recruited. I think I got it. That's one of the issues that they have in the 1920s and 30s. If you are growing your nation and you're recruiting populations from around the rest of the British Empire, what are the options to recruit? What are you recruiting for? Well, if you're just recruiting farmers, you're going to recruit one group of people. If you invest in industry and grow industry, you're going to recruit people from those professions as well. They haven't. But they've tried to domestically grow them as much as they can within the limits of domestic growth, and non-subsidized and organically, laissez-faire government. No matter what their twist, they've been pretty much laissez-faire. And now they've got very cruiser-orientated navies, with some good destroyer crews and sloop crews and submarines, but very cruiser-orientated navies. And that's what they have to play with. Which is why, honestly, as time goes on, things get more difficult for especially the Australians in being the places they want to be. Yes, they get the tribal destroyers. Yes, they get given an 8-inch cruiser by Britain to replace a cruiser they lose. Yes, they get some stuff from the Americans. But they never have enough. They are nowhere near becoming the 4th largest navy in the world. And New Zealand Navy's even further behind. We're not even going to jump into the whole issue that is the Indian Navy and the South African navies. And that is on Britain for not just 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, or 40 years of colonial mismanagement. That's for decades upon decades of colonial mismanagement and relationship mismanagement. The idea was to make them dependent upon the Royal Navy for their naval defense so that they would all support the Royal Navy, and that would help bind the empire together. But the trouble is, the Royal Navy, for that to work, needs to be funded like it's that. And whilst you could argue the British government prior to World War I was, to an extent, funding it to that necessary level, the British government after World War I with the treaties and the other things they accepted, and have now abjectly jumped away from that. They're claiming to still do it still, but they're not, because they think they can get away without it. They think that piece of paper is going to mean they can get away without doing it, and they can spend money on other things, and they can still have the glory and power of empire without paying its bills and the influence of empire. And they need the influence and the glory and power of empire to prop up the British economy. So it's really, really stupid. The British economy is as strong as it is in the 1920s and 30s because of the influence, reach, and power and glory of empire. Without it, you're in real trouble. It recovers as well as it does immediately post World War II because of the glory and power of empire. It's afterwards that Britain starts getting into trouble. And it's not done in let's put it straight, that's not good for the empire, but that's good for Britain. But it's Britain's short-sightedness in recognising. Please note, corgi fluff gets everywhere. It really does. There is nothing they can. They are trapped in the world of their own creating. They are literally flotsam and jetsam. They are doing their best to be part of the war, but what can they change? And short of doing a mass recruitment of Norwegian program, Norway program, where they were using commando raids to turn up at every Norwegian port they could and taking the entire population away with them in the night to go and crew a larger force, they couldn't do anything more than they're doing. Their power is their merchant fleet they're bringing to the table, and their merchant marine. That's their influence. That's the situation their governments have got them into. And by the way, the earlier comment on these navies about the Royal Navy and Britain getting them, the British government getting them, it also goes for their own governments, because they accepted it. They accepted that scenario, especially with the Dominions. And you can go, well, that was the British, what the British promises were. Trust but verify. Your responsibility is not to the British voters or the British taxpayers. Your responsibility is to the Australian, the Canadian, and the New Zealand and South African taxpayers. If you have any doubts in the British ability to supply enough escorts and enough small ships to do the jobs in your areas, then it's on you to build them. If you don't think the treaties are good in relationship to your security, then it's your job to stand up and say they're not good. And your job to make the case maybe for your own independent inclusion in those treaties, which America might not like, but there again, America might also look at it as a breaking up of the empire if these parts of the empire are signing the treaty independent of Britain, which they would like the idea of doing. Because again, from the Monroe Doctrine onwards, from their creation onwards, America has not liked anyone else having empires. And that's normal. Most nations do not like other nations having them empires. Apart from they all like their own empire, of course, because their own empire is run by them. So it's enlightened and great. Everyone else's empire is terrible and, horrible. The Dutch. In 1942, they're even more smashed. I mean, they've lost everything now. Or are in the process of losing it in January 1942. All the things they needed to do to try and secure it, they didn't do. They had great technology. They had great captains, great crews, great ships. Just didn't have enough and didn't do with what they needed to do. Finland is soldiering on, doing their best. They don't want to be fighting in the war they're fighting in, but they don't have any choice. And again, what is their navy doing? Providing consistent support for their land forces. Trying to assist everything out. Trying to do the bare minimum so that they are part of the alliance that they are part of, the Axis, without wanting to be part of the alliance. The Free Polish Navy. They're trying their best. Let's go find an image to summarize this all on, because I think that's worthwhile doing it. What should we say? There's a good picture coming back here somewhere. It's all the 1942 ones. I'm going to summarize it on this, from multi to monovector. So, what do you do? What do you do as a nation in this scenario? This is the last video, and it's going to be the shortest. It's probably going to be about 15 minutes long. In 1942, there is barely anything you can do as a minor power. Is there America you can order stuff from? Theoretically, but they're also maxed out building stuff for themselves. So don't expect it to get anytime soon. And of course, for that, you're going to need cold, hard cash. Yes, Lend-Lease is going to come in at a certain point, but it's going to be helpful, but that's still going to require something. And if you don't have anything, you ain't getting nothing. Especially not when there are others who do have something. There is this idea that is made popular that technology appears in war, that war acts as an impetus for technology to be created. It doesn't. Very rarely does war produce brand new technologies. Very, very rarely. It does act as an impetus for technologies which have already been worked on to be finished off. It does act as an impetus for technologies which have been merely experimental to be turned into practical. But new technologies are rare. It's rather like that with resources. Wars tend to give impetus to be better at extracting and getting the most out of a resource, but very rarely do you manage to find new sources of resource. It's often competing over existing ones. This is where the Dutch actions in damaging facilities as they withdraw from their colonies matter so much in terms of the course of the war. But also where you have a problem, if you're Japan or if you're Germany and you're going after resources. Biggest loss for Crete, of losing Crete. You lose the potential option of, with heavy bombers based there, of bombing the oil fields in Romania. You lose the option of bombing Romania without Crete. It would have been difficult to do, but it would have still been an option. It would have been very difficult to get all the bombs you needed to move all the bomber squadrons there. But there again, for the chance of bombing the Romanian oil fields, the critical oil fields that are sustaining the German war effort, I'm fairly sure the Royal Navy would have found a way for the RAF to turn up there with a load of heavy bombers. Even if the Royal Navy had had to kidnap the RAF bomber crews, the RAF bombers, and the bombs, I'm sure they would have found a way of assisting them to arriving at Crete once they figured it out. So every loss, every event has an impact. And that is the point. War is cumulative. There will be a ton of impacts. There will be a ton of problems created. And all these problems trickle down. All these problems always trickle down. And whilst large nations can adapt, large nations can pump money in, create whole new infrastructure, keep churning out the same thing thousands of times in a row, small nations, especially nations which are conquered or nations which are being bombed and are constantly having to repair and maintain their infrastructure against attack, are going to be increasingly limited in what they're going to be able to achieve. Your ideal war is one fought far enough away from your home territory that your home industry and infrastructure is safe, but close enough that you can easily resupply your forces operating there. There is basically nowhere there's going to be a perfect war. You're either going to be too close, so you can, yes, easily resupply your forces from home, but your home can be attacked by enemy aircraft, or you're going to be so far away that it's going to be a trudge to get your resources from anywhere you can produce them to where you need them. And that is going to end up deciding your war effort. Logistics are going to end up deciding what you're going to do, where you're going to fight, and how you're going to fight. Intelligence will play a factor. The information you have on your enemy, where they're weak, where they're strong. Their capabilities are going to have a factor, as are yours. But ultimately, any resources you haven't already acquired, got on stream, or built in terms of ships prior to the war, especially if they're major assets, are likely not going to be much of a factor in the war. And here is the perfect example. HMS Triumph. Laid down 1943, light fleet carrier, launched 1944, commissioned 1946. Commissioned 1946. And there was no hold on carrier production going on then. Might be a slight delay in commissioning because of the various things going on, but considering we're still war fighting Japan and the odds are working highly strong that we were going to need carriers to support any operations off the coast of Japan, I doubt there was much of a delay with her. Everything would have been already in place and proceeded as scheduled. (1946). You can make as many fancy speeches as you like as a leader of a country when war begins. But ultimately, it's going to be your decisions made by your predecessors, by you in the years prior to the war, that are going to affect its outcome. Infrastructure, resources are not a quick fix. You're not going to be able to fix them under war conditions. If I talk about any problems for these minor navies, when we go to this list, well, Australia and New Zealand have the population they have, but where are they going to get their replacement ships from if they don't have the yards and infrastructure to build them themselves? They're going to get them from Britain? Well, no, they're building everything out for themselves. They're going to get them from America? Again, how about Netherlands? They're conquered. Where are their options? Norway. Where are the population to even man and crew more ships going to come from? Norway's conquered. They're the Free Norwegian Navy, but what they've got is what they've got. And that's what they're going to have. The Dutch, the same problem. What they've got is what they have, and as they lose stuff, they're not going to get it replaced. Finland. Yes, they've still got their home, but they're in the Baltic and they've got a massive land border and they're at war with Russia. In Rice's way, what's the Navy gonna get? How do you justify the Navy getting more funding than it's already getting? Especially when your theoretical ally is Germany, which theoretically has enough naval power for both of you. Polish, again. Where's the population coming from? Where are the personnel coming to increase their fleet? There is no point having more ships if you can't crew them. And it's not just crew as in the numbers of personnel you're assigned to a carrier. You're assigned to this. It's number of personnel as in, have you got enough chiefs? Have you got enough officers? Have you got enough people who can navigate a ship? So this is what this series is about. It's about thinking about the way war narrows down your options. I know, some people have looked and gone, oh, this is counterfactual Monday night quarterbacking. It is. But it also isn't. Because when we start to think and we use things like this and questions like this to go down and go through, we realize just how difficult the options are and just how difficult war is and how you need to really think about these things a long time in advance before you end up fighting them. And I'm sure it's going to lead to some very interesting lives. Now, so far, some of these videos I have forgotten to put questions at the end of, and I've done that because I thought they would already create conversation anyway. But this one is for everyone out there to think about. If you could go back in time to January the 1st, 1937, and make one change in one nation, it's Navy, one change, which nation and what would you change? Now, you can procure an individual ship. You can accelerate a class already under construction. An individual ship they're not building or a class that's already in construction. You can change a structure of training if you want to. You can even promote someone if you want to. But I'd like to hear what that change you would make would be. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Take care.